All right. Well, I'm very happy to be here. And Gina and Jen showed you the wonders of the upper atmosphere of Mars and the surface. I'm going to talk to you about what happens in the middle. So the whole meteorology of Mars and the aspects that we study with ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. So to answer the previous question, Mars' atmosphere is extremely different from Earth and is almost uniquely composed by carbon dioxide. With ExoMars, what we do is also studying all this forest of trace gases that are extremely interesting because they reveal us processes that happen on Mars. The atmosphere of Mars has been studied by a plethora of missions since the early 60s. Water in particular was observed in 1965 for the first time. So this is a long story. And with ExoMars, what we do is to study the vertical atmosphere of Mars. And that's done in this way. If you have the satellite looks at the sun through the atmosphere, and as it orbits, it looks at different altitudes. And by putting the information together, we are able to reconstruct the vertical structure of the atmosphere of Mars. One of the things that we're very interested in terms of studying water is to study the isotopes of water. Water molecules are indeed not all the same. There are water molecules that are composed by 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and the water molecules in which 1 atoms of hydrogen is substituted by deuterium, which is heavier. So when we look at the ratio between the quantities of these 2 molecules that we find, we are looking at a process in which the water molecule, the classic water molecule, because it's lighter, is able to escape much more easily compared to the heavy water. And by looking at the ratio, we infer in this way how much water has escaped on Mars during its story. Today, Mars is losing an Olympionic pool of water every 2 weeks. This is more or less to give you an idea. And one of the things that we are able to look at with ExoMars by looking at this ratio is also studying the story of the reservoirs of water on Mars and to see whether or not they have been mixed during its history. So this is the first important aspect that we study in terms of water and the history of Mars. But also we look at a series of trace gases. Methane has been one of the most interesting during the history of the observation on Mars, because methane is a tracer for a series of processes in a planetary atmosphere. In particular, it can be produced by geologic processes and, as Jen said, biologic processes. By looking at its presence in the atmosphere, we are able to make some hypotheses. On Mars, methane has been detected from Earth for the first time in 2004 and then 2009, and its presence has been confirmed in the atmosphere of Mars by MSL, Curiosity, and Mars Express. With ExoMars, we haven't been able to find it yet. We haven't been able to observe it, and this poses some questions in terms of what is the chemistry acting in the atmosphere of Mars. We haven't found any methane, but we have found hydrogen chloride for the first time in the atmosphere of Mars, almost looking by accident to other things, as it happens in many cases in terms of the exploration of planets. Chloride is important because it has been observed on the surface, and in particular in the dust on the surface. And we have been able to demonstrate that when the dust interacts with water, it produces chloride that is released in the atmosphere, undiscovering a chemistry that wasn't unknown so far. Dust is, as at this point is clear, one of the most important components in the atmosphere of Mars, and is able to dominate the climate of the planet in many occasions. Sometimes, like it happens in 2018, dust is able to generate to expand in the atmosphere globally and to generate global dust storms, which is something that on Earth doesn't happen because the geography of Mars, as you can see here, is very different from Earth. The supercontinent on the southern hemisphere contains a lot of dust on the surface, in particular in these basins here, which can lift up in the atmosphere. And this is studied by global circulation models. We studied the circulation of dust, and we understand how it interacts with the other components of the atmosphere. Dust nuclei in particular are able to serve as the nuclei on which water can condense and form CO2 water ice crystals, but which has been observed in many occasions on the surface and in the atmosphere. CO2 can also condense because Mars is very cold, and sometimes it can precipitate on the surface in form of snow, like it happens on Earth for water. This has been observed in many occasions, in particular at nighttime on the poles and in the region of the mountains. And clouds are one of the most interesting things to study on Mars because they can reveal a lot of things about the circulation of the planet. With ExoMars, we are looking for clouds every single day by trying to spot for, especially for silt-wise clouds. As you can see, this is a map of the detection that we have done so far. Why they're so interesting? Because they can reveal phenomena, meteorological phenomena that are unusual on Earth, like snow, CO2 snow, and the formation of the clouds is still unknown on Mars, especially in the upper atmosphere. They can form by meteor particles that linger in the upper atmosphere of Mars. And we are able to explore these aspects, and we hope to discover these things in the next future with ExoMars. Thank you.
Love it.
Okay, we can open it back up for questions.
I feel like it's a very elementary question, but maybe you can just tell me, does atmosphere just mean like a concentration of some gases sitting more or less the same place? Is that, or is it more, does it mean something else?
No, you mean atmosphere? I didn't catch the beginning of the question, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I guess it was just a Wikipedia version of what's an atmosphere. Does it mean just a concentration of any gas? Does it matter what gases are sticking around, or?
No, that's by definition, you know, all the gases that are around the planet. But in the case of Mars, is particularly interesting because, of course, atmosphere means also particles, solid particles of different materials that are around the planet. And Mars is interesting because the atmosphere is actually a significant part of the atmosphere is actually dust particles that are always there, which doesn't happen on Earth. So, and by the way, that's why the reasons why the sky is the color that it is on Mars, which is red during the day and blue during the sunset, which is the opposite of Earth, and that's because of the dust particles actually.
Jen.
Yeah. Have you found, or are you looking for oxidized chlorine compounds as well?
Yes. Yes, we have, of course, I don't want to get too much into the details of the technicalities, but yeah, we look at that. We have just found HCl, which is the most simple molecule in terms of chlorides. There are a lot of hypotheses of what are the Cl compounds that enter into the cycle of Cl at some point, and how this disappears from the atmosphere of Mars, which is one of the great questions, because we find the HCl only in a very particular moment of the year, and which is during the dusty season. And so the next step probably will be looking for oxidized compounds, so more complex molecules that contain Cl. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just wondering about the links to the surface perchlorate.
Yeah, great question. We're trying to find it out.
Jamie?
Thanks. Another fantastic presentation. So something that I'm curious about, since you have all these amazing visuals, and by the way, +1 to Mel's comment about good use of emoji, fantastic. I'm curious how these graphics, like some of them are pretty clearly images, like photography, photo or something like that, but a lot of them are really photorealistic, but I'm guessing we don't, like, they're graphically composed somehow. Like, how do you generate images without having like actual cameras that take those kinds of pictures? Like,
are you talking about one in particular? We can go to the one.
I mean, most of them. They're also really compelling and interesting. I just, how do you come up with?
Let's go to this one, for example. Oh,
sure.
Sorry. Yeah, this one. Well, yeah, this usually what we do is to first investigate the physics of a process, and that involves, of course, taking data and which are very obscure. I didn't show any data apart from probably an example in one of the slides to show spectra, because let me go out to the presentation. So I didn't show any data, but simply because they are very obscure, and to understand data, it takes a lot of course, training of what the spacecraft does. But what we do is to take quantities, like, for example, the vertical profile of how much water vapor there is at a certain altitude. And we get it from there. So we put together quantities and we try to understand the physics that's behind it, which is, of course, if you ask me, a good 50% of the job. So most of the graphics are composed in this second part when you have the data and you get the things.
Very cool. Thank you.
And we actually have graphic artists at NASA that can create these for us. So we have professionals that, we come to them with our scientific idea, and then they are creative in, being able to make a beautiful graphic that we can then communicate with, because I've worked with them before trying to draw a picture of what I wanted, and they came away with something much better. So we lean on them a lot.
That sounds like a really fun.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great point, Gina. It's exactly, we have an entire department of people who work on that. Every space agency has one. And my experience coming from Europe is that coming here, I've grown a lot about how to represent the data, because work with complex concepts and making them simple is a big part of what we do.
Kenji?
Very good. As far as instruments, how are you measuring? Like, I guess I want to know more about you mentioned you're looking at the sun through the atmosphere, and so like, visible or otherwise type of instruments, and that's one question. And then another question is like, are you doing any kind of like sort of stellar astronomy? Like, are you looking at things besides the sun, or is it only the sun that you're looking at?
Oh, these are excellent questions. I love talking about data. It's my job. No, okay. So that's a great question, because it gives me the opportunity to specify a little bit more on what we do. So the onboard TGO, trace gas orbiter, there are 4 instruments. 2 of them are infrared and UV spectrometers. So what we do, it's the idea is that if you look at the sun and the spacecraft sunsets or sunrises, if you want to say that, around the planet. So you look at how the solar radiation is attenuated by the atmosphere. And in the infrared, every molecule, every aerosol has its own fingerprint, essentially. So when you look at the sun, you know how the sun should look, the radiation should look. And by comparing outside and inside the atmosphere, you are able to look at these fingerprints of molecules, essentially. We call them spectral lines. And by there, you can tell how much there is of each molecule and of each aerosol. So that's the kind of measurement we do. Yeah, I hope this is a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
And besides that, there are also another 2 instruments on ExoMars. One is CASIS, it's a camera, so it takes pictures high resolution of the surface. And there is FRIEND, which is a neutron detector, which looks for the idea is to look for what happens in the subsurface in terms of probably water that is in the subsurface and things like this. In general, neutron radiation, so heavy radiation. And besides looking at the sun, the instrument doesn't do much else. But there is also, of course, a nadir viewing. So when we look to the surface, like the most of the spacecraft that are on Mars, we don't do any astronomy. Probably maybe looking at the stars probably Maven goes more into that domain. I'm not an expert. Gina can tell you more about it probably, but we don't do anything else.
Thank you.
We've got time for one last question from Sarah, and hopefully some of the remaining questions we can maybe tackle after we wrap up.
Yeah, maybe this might be partly a question for Connor, but I think we should totally find a NASA artist and have them give a talk at the next one of these. But a question for maybe all 3 of our speakers today. I'm kind of interested in your team of artists. Is like, do they have generally like a science background and an art background, or how do they get into these jobs, and how many of them are there, and kind of what's the setup? Because we never think about the source of all these fascinating graphics, but like I'm super impressed.
That's a great question, Sarah. I think they are highly trained in art, I would say. We take in people who are like even animation majors to come and do at Goddard, we have an animation studio. I'm sure JPL has one as well. We kind of have 2 types on the video side, we have 2 types. We have people who basically take data and then do data visualization. So kind of swirling images of the Arctic polar vortex and things like that. And then there's more like the kind of the sci-fi animation type where they, do a spacecraft arriving at a planet and going into orbit or something like that, which of course there's no actual footage of that. It's entirely based on the model of the spacecraft and, an art concept and so on. So there's actually two sides, the data visualization and the animation studio. And then we have just a range of people who help us out with graphics. We have a couple of really talented people in our science directorate at Goddard who do that. But I don't think any of them are people who like went all the way through PhD and, became like professional scientists and then switched to animation. I think they're mostly people who are technical, they've been technical drawing or engineering or that sort of background. And then they've decided that they really enjoy doing that graphical support for the scientific sides. But that's a really good question. I don't entirely know the answer.
I can jump in a little bit, Connor, just because I've worked with some of them for the graphics that I've shown on Maven and some from some of my other work. But yeah, it depends on what you're trying to visualize. Like, is it something that we want to go out to the public and it doesn't necessarily have to be precise scientifically to, talk about our latest theory or hypothesis? In that case, we can go to the concept image lab where they're making all of these amazing drawings that look very lifelike, which would be more artistic. But then if we need something that we want a little more correct from the physics standpoint, I think some of them do have at least science or maybe computer modeling background to some extent, just because I've worked with some that can take models that we've generated of these global magnetic fields at different planets, and they'll take our physics model, put it into their art to actually make sure that the excuse me, the concept or the video that they're making is using that model and actually correct. So they have to have the ability and the knowledge to actually run our models and able to do in order to do that. So there is a little bit of work behind it that's not art, depending on how much you want done. And so it all depends on the audience.
That's fascinating that there's two different ways that you could do it. Of course, that makes sense, but I never thought about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I dropped a link in the chat too for, it's called the Science Visualization Studio that we have at NASA Goddard, where you can just do a search. And so even to make this talk, I go there and I type in the Maven mission because that's the easiest way for me to search the repository to find the graphics for the talks.
Yeah, and they're also great for showing how instruments work. The mass spectrometry graphic or movie came from that, and it's just so nice to have them help us explain complex processes and instruments.
Yeah, I agree. We're super lucky to have that kind of, we're a big enough organization that we have enough depth that we can have that support for some of our science outreach, which some of our colleagues at universities, they're in a smaller department, they don't have, like an animation studio they can just go to. But, we can partner with them on lots of things. So what I was going to do right now was just to kind of do kind of like a wrap up, just in case anybody has to leave, but then we can leave the Zoom open afterwards. I think Renata will tell me if I'm wrong about that, but we can leave it open for people. She's taking her thumbs up. Okay, leave it open for people who want to like stay and socialize and talk or just talk more about science. But from my perspective, I'm kind of new to this. I don't have any actual formal announcements or anything. I'm going to give Preston the opportunity in a minute to speak if he has any announcements. But I just want to thank, first of all, our three amazing speakers for being
that was amazing.
Being, arm twisted by me into, giving up part of their Sunday to communicate the amazing results they've been getting on their active Mars missions, which they do for their day job week round, and they give up part of their weekend to do it as well. So thanks to Gina and Jen and Giuliano for amazing talks, which they put a lot of effort into. And then personally, I want to also thank especially Renata and Jamie and Preston for kind of guiding me through being a host the first time, which took a lot of handholding and, telling me, you need to do this now and it's time to send out this message. And I definitely it wouldn't have been a smooth process without their help. So I want to thank them for giving me the opportunity to do this and then also helping me. So thanks, Sinsin, organizing committee people.
And I'm
And,
gonna give you a thanks. I'm interrupting. I know. Sorry to screw up the flow, but most of the time when there's new hosts, we pair you up with somebody, and you just did it. And so that's awesome. You jumped into the deep end, and yeah, put on a really phenomenal event. Thanks for gathering these people to present for us today. Oh my goodness, that was awesome. I feel like we won something. So thank you so much, presenters, and Connor, so much for hosting.
it's definitely a pleasure. We love to talk about what we do. And I'm not a Mars person. I'm an outer planets person. So maybe, a while from now, maybe like a year from now or something, we'll gather up our energies and a bunch more speakers and do an outer planets special event.